The downtown law office gleams with polished marble and mahogany. Olivia Chen sits across from the conference table, her trembling hand gripping a Mont Blanc pen worth more than her monthly rent. The contract spreads before her, like salvation wrapped in legal language. Behind glass walls, Harrison Blackwood observes with the predatory patience of a man who owns judges and senators. The bookstore debt, her husband's medical bills, the crushing weight of grief and bankruptcy. One signature promises to end it all. The elevator chimes. Security steps aside, confused. A man in weathered Carhartt and work boots strides in, a blonde girl clutching a compass necklace behind him. His voice cuts through the corporate silence with military authority. "Don't sign that, ma'am." Blackwood turns, annoyed smirk already forming. Then the stranger pulls out a manila envelope, slides out a single photograph, and Harrison Blackwood's billion-dollar confidence freezes into pure terror. "You," he whispers. 2 weeks earlier, Mac Sullivan had been a different man. Mac, as everyone called him, hammered another nail into the Hendersons' front porch, sweat beading on his forehead despite the Vermont autumn chill. His daughter Zoe sat cross-legged on the grass, homework spread around her like fallen leaves, Sarah's old military compass glinting on its chain around her neck. The compass had been his wife's constant companion through 3 deployments in Afghanistan. Now it guided their 9-year-old daughter through a world where Mum existed only in photographs and fading memories. Mac paused his work, watching Zoe trace her finger along a math problem. 2 years. 2 years since the IED explosion that brought Sarah home in a flag-draped coffin. 2 years of learning to braid hair, pack school lunches, and explain why Daddy sometimes woke up screaming from dreams that smelled like burning diesel and cordite. The carpentry work paid enough to keep food on the table, but barely. Millbrook was dying slowly, one foreclosure at a time, and Mac couldn't shake the feeling that something predatory was feeding on his neighbor's misfortune. Mrs. Patterson shuffled over from next door, her walker scraping against the concrete. At 78, she'd lived in the same house for 50 years, raised 6 children, buried a husband. Last month, she'd lost it all to something called Blackwood Enterprises. Debt consolidation? They'd called it. Help for struggling families? Mac had watched the moving trucks carry away 5 decades of memories, watched Mrs. Patterson shrink into herself like a flower closing against frost. The old woman had trusted the wrong people with the wrong papers, and now she lived in her daughter's basement an hour away. "Daddy!" Zoe called, not looking up from her homework. "What's a vulture?" Mac set down his hammer, studied his daughter's serious face. At 9, Zoe possessed an unsettling ability to ask questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "It's a bird that feeds on things that are already dead, sweetheart." She nodded thoughtfully, pencil tapping against her lips in a gesture so much like Sarah that it made Mac's chest tighten. Mrs. Patterson said some vultures wear suits. That evening, Mac sat at his kitchen table with a beer and a stack of bills. The mortgage payment was 3 weeks late, and Zoe needed new winter boots. His old military contacts had dried up, and carpentry work grew scarcer as more families fled Millbrook. The town was hemorrhaging people, and hope in equal measure. Mac had been Army Criminal Investigation Division before Sarah's death changed everything. Financial crimes, war profiteering, corruption cases that reached into the highest levels of government. He'd been good at it, following paper trails and connecting dots that others missed. Now he built porches and fixed leaky faucets, trying to outrun memories that lurked in every shadow. The compass sat on the windowsill, catching streetlight through old glass. Sarah had carried it through Kandahar, Helmand, Kunar province. "True north," she used to say when Mac felt lost in the maze of military bureaucracy and impossible orders. "Find true north, and everything else falls into place." Mac wondered what true north looked like for a single father in a dying town, raising a daughter who asked questions about vultures and wore her mother's compass like armor against a world that had already taken too much. 3 days later, Mac walked into Chapter and Verse bookstore, ostensibly looking for a birthday present for Zoe. In reality, he'd heard that Olivia Chen, the owner, was Blackwood's next target. The shop smelled like vanilla candles and old paper. Cramped shelves reaching toward a tin ceiling painted the color of summer sky. Children's books spilled from wooden crates near a reading corner with threadbare cushions and a rocking chair that had seen better decades. It felt like the kind of place that mattered, the kind of place that made a community worth saving. Olivia sat behind the register, dark hair escaping from a messy bun, surrounded by legal documents that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Her husband's medical bills were stacked beside bankruptcy forms, and Mac recognized the particular weight of paperwork that could crush a person's spirit. She looked up when the door chime announced his arrival, managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you find something?" Mac gestured toward the children's section. "Birthday present for my daughter. She's 9, loves adventure stories. Smart girl." Olivia emerged from behind the counter, stepping carefully around boxes of books. "What kind of adventures? Dragons, pirates, space exploration?" Mac found himself studying her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she gestured. "Anything where the good guys win, I guess." The words carried more weight than he'd intended, and Olivia's expression shifted, recognition flickering across her features. She'd heard about Mrs. Patterson, about the other families Blackwood had helped right out of their homes. They spent an hour discussing books, but really talking about other things. Olivia's husband, James, had been Navy, deployed twice to the Persian Gulf before cancer claimed him at 35. The medical bills had consumed their savings, the insurance payouts, everything they'd built together. Mac recognized the particular exhaustion of military widowhood, the way grief and bureaucracy combined into something uniquely brutal. When Zoe appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, Olivia's entire demeanor softened. "You must be the birthday girl. Not until next week." Zoe approached the counter with the cautious dignity of a child who'd learned early that adults often disappointed you. "Daddy says you have good books here." Olivia smiled, the first genuine expression Mac had seen from her. "I have the best books. Want to see something special?" She led them to a corner where a glass case held a first edition of A Wrinkle in Time, signed by Madeline Longle. Zoe pressed her nose against the glass, studying the careful inscription. "My mum read me this book," she whispered, "before she went to heaven." Mac watched Olivia's face transform, saw the moment she truly understood what they'd lost. "Would you like to hold it?" she asked quietly. "Just for a minute." Zoe's eyes went wide. "Really?" Olivia unlocked the case with ceremony, placed the precious book into small hands that trembled with reverence. "Books are meant to be touched," she said. "Stories want to be shared." Mac felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd carried for 2 years. When was the last time someone had been kind to his daughter just because she deserved kindness? Later, as Olivia rang up 3 adventure novels and a journal with a compass embossed on the cover, Mac noticed the legal documents again. Blackwood Enterprises letterhead, terms and conditions in fine print designed to confuse and obscure. "Those contracts," he said carefully. "You might want someone to look them over before you sign anything." Olivia's laugh held no humor. "Someone like who? The lawyers I can't afford?" Mac pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in months. "Someone like my friend who specializes in predatory lending cases. Pro bono for military families. Why would you help me?" The question hung between them, loaded with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easy offers. Mac glanced at Zoe, who was examining her new compass journal with intense concentration. Because vultures count on good people being too proud or too scared to ask for help. Olivia studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Yes, thank you. As they left the bookstore, Zoe clutched her new books against her chest. I like her, Daddy. She smells like Mom's old books. The following weekend, Mac found himself back at chapter and verse, this time with a toolbox and a mission to fix the temperamental front door. Zoe had insisted on coming along, claiming she needed to exchange one of her books for a different adventure. In reality, Mac suspected his daughter was developing a crush on the kind woman who'd let her hold a first edition. Olivia greeted them with coffee and homemade banana bread, apologizing for the mess as she cleared legal documents from the reading table. My friend looked over those contracts, Mac said, accepting a steaming mug. You were right to be suspicious. Hidden fees, predatory interest rates, clauses that would essentially hand over your property for a fraction of its value. Olivia sank into the rocking chair, exhaustion written across her features. I figured as much, but I'm 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the medical bills keep coming. Sometimes a bad deal feels better than no deal at all. Mac understood that particular desperation, the way financial pressure could make terrible options seem reasonable. While Mac worked on the door, Olivia and Zoe sorted through children's books, creating elaborate stacks organized by reading level and adventure quotient. Their laughter filtered through the shop like sunlight through old glass, and Mac found himself working slower than necessary, reluctant to break the spell of normalcy. When had he last heard Zoe laugh like that? When had he last felt the particular peace that came from useful work in pleasant company? Sarah's compass caught the afternoon light, and for once the reminder didn't bring pain. Tell me about your mum, Olivia said to Zoe, and Mac's hands stilled on the doorframe. His daughter rarely talked about Sarah with strangers, protective of memories that felt too precious to share. But something about Olivia's gentle attention unlocked words that had been dammed up for months. She was really brave. She fixed helicopters in Afghanistan, and she could play guitar, and she made the best pancakes in the whole world. Zoe's voice carried the careful reverence of a child describing a saint. Daddy has pictures, but I remember her hands. They were strong but soft. Mac felt his throat tighten, unprepared for the casual intimacy of grief shared with someone who understood loss. Olivia's husband had died slowly, surrounded by machines and false hope. Sarah had died instantly, half a world away, her body returned in pieces Mac couldn't bear to identify. Different tragedies, same devastating result. James used to read to me, Olivia said quietly. Even when the chemo made him too sick to hold a book, he'd tell me stories from memory. I think that's why I love this place. Stories never really die. The afternoon dissolved into evening without Mac noticing. Zoe fell asleep in the reading corner, curled around a stuffed dragon Olivia had produced from somewhere. Mac and Olivia talked in low voices, sharing pieces of themselves they'd kept locked away. Military life, the weight of deployment, the particular challenge of loving someone whose job involved running toward danger instead of away from it. When Mac finally carried his sleeping daughter to the truck, he felt lighter than he had in months. Same time next week, Olivia asked, and something in her voice suggested she wasn't just talking about door repairs. Mac nodded, started to say something, then stopped. Words felt dangerous, loaded with implications he wasn't ready to examine. Same time, he agreed, and drove home through streets that felt less empty than they had that morning. In the passenger seat, Zoe stirred in her sleep, Sarah's compass catching streetlight like a benediction. But beneath the growing warmth, Mac's investigative instincts were stirring. Too many families in Millbrook had fallen victim to Blackwood's generosity. Mrs. Patterson, the Hendersons, the young couple who'd run the diner until last month. A pattern was emerging, methodical and predatory. During quiet moments between carpentry jobs, Mac found himself researching Blackwood enterprises, following paper trails that led nowhere and corporate structures designed to obscure rather than illuminate. The more he dug, the more familiar the tactics became. Old habits died hard. Mac spent evenings at the town hall, poring over property records and business licenses. Blackwood Enterprises had appeared seemingly overnight, purchasing distressed properties for pennies on the dollar, always with legal paperwork so complex that desperate people signed without understanding what they were surrendering. But the deeper Mac dug, the more questions arose. How did Blackwood always know exactly when families were most vulnerable? How did he acquire such detailed information about military benefits, disability payments, deployment schedules? The answer came in a manila folder buried in the archives, dusty with neglect, and misfiled under the wrong year. Blackwood Defense Solutions, incorporated 15 years earlier, government contracts for military equipment, including armored vehicles and communications gear. Mac's blood ran cold as he read contract numbers he recognized, unit designations that brought back memories of scorching Afghan heat and the constant taste of fear. Sarah's unit had relied on Blackwood equipment. Sarah's convoy had been destroyed despite supposedly state-of-the-art armor plating. That night, Mac sat in his kitchen with Sarah's personal effects spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle he'd been too grief-stricken to solve. Her deployment gear, carefully preserved in plastic tubs. Her notebooks, filled with mechanical observations and maintenance records. And there, hidden in a false bottom of her toolkit, a manila envelope he'd never seen before. Inside, photographs of damaged equipment, detailed notes about armor plating that failed under conditions it should have withstood, and a letter addressed to Mac in Sarah's careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me," the letter began. "I've been documenting equipment failures for months. The armor plating on our vehicles is substandard, manufactured with recycled materials that can't withstand IED blasts. Someone is getting rich while soldiers die, and I think they know I'm getting close to proof. I've been careful, but if something happens, you need to know this wasn't random. Look for patterns, Mac. Look for connections. Find the truth." Mac's hands shook as he read further. Sarah had been building a case, documenting a conspiracy that reached from Afghan battlefields to Pentagon procurement offices. She'd identified the manufacturer, traced the paper trail, connected deaths to defective equipment. And then she'd died. Her convoy destroyed by an IED that should have been survivable with properly manufactured armor. Mac felt the world tilt, everything he'd believed about random tragedy and cruel fate rewriting itself into something far more sinister. The photographs in Sarah's envelope showed damage patterns inconsistent with quality materials, stress fractures that spoke of corner cutting and cost-saving measures implemented at the expense of human lives. Sarah had been a helicopter mechanic, trained to spot the difference between battle damage and manufacturing defects. Her notes were meticulous, damning, and incomplete. She'd died before she could finish gathering evidence, before she could expose the corruption that had killed her and countless others. Mac spread the documents across his kitchen table, Sarah's investigation merging with his current research into Blackwood's activities. The connections were tenuous but troubling. Blackwood Defense Solutions had dissolved shortly after Sarah's death, its contracts quietly transferred to other companies. Blackwood Enterprises had emerged years later, different business model, but same predatory instincts. And now Harrison Blackwood was systematically targeting the families of veterans, particularly those whose loved ones had died in equipment failures during the height of the Afghan conflict. The realization hit Mac like a physical blow. Blackwood wasn't just targeting vulnerable families randomly. He was specifically hunting the people most likely to recognize his name, most likely to connect him to past crimes. Military families who might remember faulty equipment, who might ask uncomfortable questions about companies that profited from soldier deaths. Mac's investigation into current fraud had led him straight back to the conspiracy that had killed his wife. Monday morning found Mac standing outside Chapter and Verse, Sarah's evidence tucked securely in a messenger bag. Olivia unlocked the door with coffee-stained fingers, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" Mac followed her inside, waited until she'd flipped the sign to open, and started the morning routines that provided structure to grief. "I need to show you something. About Blackwood. About why he's really targeting families like yours." They spread Sarah's documents across the reading table where Zoe had sorted books just days earlier. Olivia studied the photographs, the technical diagrams, the careful notations in a dead woman's handwriting. Mac explained about Blackwood defense solutions, about equipment failures and covered-up investigations, about Sarah's death and the evidence she'd died trying to preserve. Olivia's face went pale as the implications became clear. "He's not just stealing property," she whispered. "He's eliminating witnesses." Mac nodded grimly. Military families who might remember his company name from their loved one's service. People who might connect current crimes to past ones. They sat in silence, surrounded by the devastating proof of corporate murder disguised as business practice. Olivia's husband James had served on ships equipped with Blackwood communications gear. Mrs. Patterson's son had died in a vehicle that should have protected him. The weight of knowledge settled between them like a physical presence. This wasn't just about predatory lending or property fraud. This was about a man who'd built his fortune on soldier deaths and was now systematically silencing anyone who might expose him. Mac felt the familiar fire of purpose, the same driving need for justice that had sustained him through years of military investigations. But this time, the stakes were personal in ways that made his hands shake and his vision blur with rage. "What do we do?" Olivia asked, and Mac heard echoes of Sarah in the question. "What do we do when the system is rigged against us? What do we do when the powerful prey on the powerless with impunity? What do we do when justice requires risking everything we have left to lose?" Mac looked around the bookstore, at the children's corner where Zoe had felt safe enough to sleep, at the woman who'd shown his daughter kindness when kindness felt extinct. "We finish what Sarah started," he said finally. "We gather evidence, build a case, expose the truth." But even as he spoke the words, Mac knew the real question wasn't what they should do. The real question was whether they'd live long enough to do it. Harrison Blackwood had killed to protect his secrets before. He wouldn't hesitate to kill again. Outside Chapter and Verse, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb and parked. The driver never got out, never moved, just sat watching the bookstore with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Mac noticed the car when he left for lunch. It was still there when he returned. Still there when evening shadows stretched across Main Street like grasping fingers. The message was clear. They were being watched. The hunt had begun. That night, Mac called his old partner from the CID, Agent Patricia Reyes, now working white-collar crime for the FBI. Her voice carried across years and miles, bringing back memories of shared investigations and late-night case reviews. "Mac Sullivan, I wondered when you'd resurface." He explained about Blackwood, about Sarah's evidence, about the current fraud targeting military families. Patricia listened without interruption, and Mac could hear her taking notes. "I need you to be very careful," she said when he finished. "We've been building a case against defense contractor corruption for 2 years. Blackwood's name has come up before, but we could never make charges stick. If what you're telling me is true, if you have Sarah's evidence, this could be the break we've been waiting for." Mac felt a surge of hope. quickly tempered by Patricia's next words. "But these people play for keeps, Mac. Document everything. Trust no one locally. And if things get dangerous, you call me immediately." Mac hung up, feeling both vindicated and terrified. The FBI wanted Blackwood, but building a federal case would take time they might not have. In the meantime, he and Olivia were targets in a game where the stakes were life and death. That night, Mac double-checked every lock in his house, drew the curtains tight, and slept with Sarah's service pistol under his pillow. 2 rooms away, Zoe dreamed peacefully, unaware that her father's past had finally caught up with them. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Mac was installing new security cameras at chapter and verse when Olivia's phone buzzed with a text message. "Conference room. Blackwood Tower, 1 hour. Come alone." Mac's blood ran cold as he read over her shoulder. This was it. The moment when Predator revealed himself to prey. But Mac Sullivan wasn't prey anymore. He was a hunter who'd found his target. "You're not going alone," he said, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Patricia, getting federal backup." But Olivia shook her head, touching the compass around Zoe's neck with trembling fingers. "If I don't go, he'll know we're onto him. He'll disappear, change identities, start over somewhere else. How many more families will he destroy while we wait for bureaucrats to file paperwork?" Mac wanted to argue, but he understood the logic. Blackwood held all the cards as long as he remained hidden in corporate boardrooms and legal complexities. Sometimes the only way to catch a predator was to walk into his trap with eyes wide open. "Then we go together," Mac said, "and we're not going empty-handed." An hour later, they walked into the downtown law office, where Harrison Blackwood waited with lawyers and contracts and the absolute confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. The scene played out exactly as Mac had envisioned, exactly as the title had promised. Olivia trembling over the contract, Blackwood watching with predatory satisfaction. And then Mac's entrance, Sarah's evidence in hand, ready to destroy a monster who'd hidden behind corporate respectability for far too long. "Don't sign that, Mom," Mac said, and watched Harrison Blackwood's world begin to crumble. The photograph he pulled from the envelope was 15 years old, showing Blackwood shaking hands with a Pentagon procurement officer who'd later been convicted of taking bribes. Blackwood's face went white, then grey, as recognition dawned. "Sergeant Marcus Sullivan," he whispered. "I thought you learned to stay away." Mac smiled grimly. "I learned to finish what I started. The FBI is very interested in talking to you about defense contracts, equipment failures, and the systematic murder of American soldiers. What followed was chaos. Lawyers scrambling for phones, security guards uncertain whether to arrest the intruder or protect their employer. Blackwood backing towards the windows like a cornered animal, all his corporate polish stripped away to reveal the killer underneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he snarled. "I own judges, senators, generals. I've made billions from war, and I'll make billions more. One dead soldier's husband won't stop me." "Maybe not," Mac agreed, "but the FBI will. Turns out my wife wasn't the only one investigating your company. She was part of a larger investigation that's been building for years. You killed her before she could testify, but her evidence survived. And now it's going to bury you." The arrest came 12 hours later, federal agents swarming Blackwood's corporate offices with warrants and evidence boxes. Mac watched from across the street, holding Zoe's hand as news vans gathered and reporters shouted questions into microphones. Justice was messy, incomplete, tangled up in legal proceedings that would drag on for years. But it was justice nonetheless. Olivia kept her bookstore. Mrs. Patterson moved back into her house. The families Blackwood had defrauded got their properties returned, their dignity restored. Millbrook began to heal, slowly and carefully, the way communities do when they remember how to trust each other again. Mac continued his carpentry work, But now he also served as an unofficial advocate for military families, helping them navigate bureaucracy and recognize predatory schemes. 6 months later, Mac sat in chapter and verse on a Saturday morning, installing a new bookshelf, while Olivia organized the children's section. They'd never talked about what they were to each other, never defined their relationship, or made promises about the future. They were simply present, day after day, choosing to share space and time and the quiet comfort of companionship. Zoe sat cross-legged on the reading rug, Sarah's compass laid open beside a book about explorers. She studied the brass instrument thoughtfully, then looked up at the 2 adults working in comfortable silence. "Dad," she said, "does Mum's compass still work if you're not lost?" Mac paused his drilling, considered the question that went deeper than navigation. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Like, what if you're not trying to find your way somewhere? What if you're already where you belong?" Olivia stopped organizing books, met Mac's eyes across the shop. Not romantic, not charged with unspoken promises, just acknowledgement of shared understanding. "Then maybe," Olivia said softly, "the compass points to what matters most. Not where you're going, but who you're with." Mrs. Patterson shuffled in, Walker scraping against the wooden floor. "Mac, dear, could you look at my kitchen faucet when you have time?" A young mother with a toddler followed. "Olivia, do you still have those parenting books?" Life continued around them, ordinary and precious, unnoticed miracles of human connection and community care. Later, as afternoon light slanted through old windows, Zoe approached Olivia with serious purpose. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia knelt to child height, gave the question the attention it deserved. "Always." Zoe twisted Sarah's compass between small fingers. "Do you think you'll stay here forever?" Olivia considered carefully, unwilling to make promises she couldn't keep. "I don't know about forever, but I know about today, and today feels like where I belong." Mac overheard from across the room, but didn't interrupt. No pressure for declarations, no need to define relationships or plan futures. Some connections existed beyond labels, deeper than words, sustained by daily choice rather than grand gestures. At closing time, Mac gathered his tools while Olivia turned off lights, and Zoe packed her compass safely away. "See you tomorrow?" Olivia asked, simple question without weight or expectation. "Yeah," Mac replied. "Same time." They walked out together into Millbrook evening. 3 people who'd found their way home, not through dramatic revelation or perfect resolution, but through the quiet decision to show up for each other, day after ordinary day. The compass rested in Zoe's backpack, needle steady and sure, not pointing north toward some distant destination, but centered in the present moment, surrounded by the people who'd chosen to stay. In the empty bookstore behind them, Sarah's photograph sat on the memorial wall, not as shrine to the past, but as reminder that some love echoes forward, helping others find their way to becoming who they're meant to be. Outside, Millbrook settled into evening calm. Lights came on in houses where families were learning to trust again. Stories continued, imperfect and ongoing, written in daily acts of kindness and community care. True north, it turned out, wasn't a direction you followed. It was a place you created, one choice at a time, with people brave enough to stay.